Fantasy has always provided this magical, extraordinary escape, which also worked as a vehicle to explore real themes, epic battles, immersive worlds, and characters you just can't help but root for. Remember how the Lord of the Rings trilogy masterfully distilled Tolkien's work to its essentials to make it fit into a trilogy framework without losing its magic. The same can be said to a lot of the Harry Potter movies and the early Game of Thrones seasons, but lately, it feels like that spark is fading. The Rings of Power, The Wheel of Time, The Witcher, why are so many fantasy adaptations falling flat?
And it's not just nitpicking. Fans are genuinely frustrated. These are stories we loved for decades, settings we've dreamed of seeing brought to life. But when the adaptations miss the mark, it feels like such a missed opportunity. It is not every day that a franchise gets adapted, and it's even less likely that a bad adaptation will be reimagined in the future. What is causing this decline? Is it the writing, studio meddling, or just impossible expectations from the fans? Let's unpack this and maybe figure out how to bring the magic back.
Fantasy is special because it takes us somewhere else entirely. It's the immersiveness, wonder, and epic journeys, the heroes who grow and change, and the worlds that feel like they could exist just beyond the main plot. Think about the Lord of the Rings or the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones. Every detail felt so intentional. Even some of the Harry Potter movies hit that sweet spot, balancing the magic and the emotional weight. These are the gold standards, the ones successful at the gargantuan task of effectively summarizing the lengthy source material and tell a story, but made us feel like we were living it. That's a high bar to clear, and when an adaptation misses, oh, we noticed.
For fans, fantasy is personal. These are books we grew up with, characters we've imagined in our heads for years. So when studios take these beloved stories and adapt them, the stakes are sky high. For the studios, it's a massive investment in time, money, and reputation. If they get it right, it's a cultural phenomenon. But if they mess up, the backlash is brutal, and trust me, fans aren't shy about letting them know.
The Lord of the Rings trilogy was, and still is, a masterpiece of fantasy adaptation. Peter Jackson took Tolkien's sprawling epic and brought it to life with stunning visuals, heartfelt performances, and an attention to detail that made Middle-earth feel real. The movies respected the source material, while making it accessible to a wider audience. Fans and newcomers alike were captivated by its emotional beats, epic battles, and timeless themes. It set the gold standard for how to adapt a beloved fantasy world, and it's a benchmark we still compare everything to. Then came the Hobbit trilogy, and let's just say, fans were split. On one hand, it had flashes of brilliance, the cast was solid, and there were moments that recaptured the magic of Middle-earth. But stretching a single book into 3 movies, that was a decision that didn't sit well with a lot of people. It felt bloated, with the unnecessary subplots and over-the-top CGI that took away from the grounded feel of the original trilogy. And then we got The Rings of Power, Amazon's billion-dollar gamble to expand the world of Tolkien. While it had jaw-dropping visuals and clearly spared no expense, it just didn't resonate the way the other adaptations did. Fans criticized this pacing, underdeveloped characters, and lack of cohesion with Tolkien's lore. It felt like a show trying to be epic without earning it, like the heart and soul of Middle-earth were missing.
Fans' reactions said it all. While The Lord of the Rings still gets celebrated as one of the greatest trilogies of all time, The Hobbit often gets lukewarm responses like it was fine. And Rings of Power, people were frustrated, saying it felt more like a corporate product.
It's a reminder that no matter how big the budget or how famous the IP,
fans will always notice when something doesn't live up to the IP. In my opinion, Rings of Power is perfectly fine and average, but it just feels like a missed opportunity because it could have been legendary.
The Harry Potter movies were a cultural phenomenon, plain and simple. They brought J.K. Rowling's magical world to life in a way that felt both reasonably faithful to the books and visually stunning. The cast became iconic, the settings felt alive, and the movies grew darker and more mature as the story progressed, just like the books. Fans loved how the films captured the heart of the series. It wasn't perfect, of course, but overall, it's hard to find a franchise that impacted people so deeply across generations. But then came Fantastic Beasts. It started with promise, a dive into the wizarding world's history with Newt Scamander as a quirky, lovable lead. But by the second movie, things started to unravel. The story became convoluted, trying too hard to connect to Harry Potter with fan service moments and messy plot lines. Add to that the tonal shifts, underdeveloped characters, and controversial casting decisions, and the series felt like it lost its identity. It didn't have the charm or focus of the original.
Fans were quick to voice their disappointment. While the Harry Potter films are still celebrated and rewatched religiously,
Fantastic Beasts has been criticized for being overcomplicated and
lacking the magic that made the wizarding world so beloved. People were especially frustrated with the random focus on Grindelwald and Dumbledore's backstory instead of the whimsical, creature-filled adventures they were expecting. A lot of people thought that those two elements of the story didn't clash that well. The franchise just felt like they were trying to cash in nostalgia too hard without recapturing the wonder that made us fall in love with the series in the first place.
Game of Thrones redefined what the genre could be on TV. It was a gritty, character-driven political drama with shocking twists and complex relationships. It felt real, even in a world with magic and dire wolves, because the stakes were so high and the characters were so well written. People who had never touched a fantasy book in their lives were suddenly obsessed with this medieval drama, and it proved to studios that fantasy could be more than a niche genre. It could be a global phenomenon, but oh, how the mighty fell. Those last few seasons of Game of Thrones, they're infamous for a reason. The storytelling started to feel rushed, like the writers just wanted to wrap things up and move on to writing Star Wars. Characters who had spent seasons evolving were suddenly sidelined, or had their arcs abandoned altogether. And those plotlines we all obsessed over, half of them went unresolved. Fans were left scratching their heads, wondering how a show that once set the new standard for epic storytelling could fumble so hard at the finish line.
People weren't quiet about their disappointment either. Remember the infamous petition to remake Season 8? It got over 1 million signatures. Social media exploded with memes, rants, and breakdowns of what went wrong. Quotes like "Bran the Broken" or "That's not how Danny would act" became part of pop culture. It was like watching a beloved character make every wrong decision, and fans were upset and heartbroken. But what exactly makes an adaptation fail? Let's explore this next.
Adapting fantasy isn't easy. You're dealing with huge worlds, passionate fans, and stories that are often as dense as they are beloved.
But lately, it feels like so many shows are falling into the same trap. Poor writing, rushed pacing, and a fixation on flashy visuals over storytelling. Let's break this down and see how they've impacted some of the biggest fantasy adaptations in recent years.
We get it. Changes to the source material are inevitable. But when those changes derail what made the story special, that's where the frustration kicks in. The Wheel of Time had this problem, making choices that alienated longtime fans of Jordan's epic.
It's a tough balance, staying true to the books while making the show accessible to a new audience. But when you try to please everyone and lose the heart of your story, nobody ends up happy.
Nothing kills a fantasy epic faster than a story that feels rushed. Look at Game of Thrones Season 8. It was like they hit fast forward on the climax of years of careful build-up. Battles that should have been legendary felt underwhelming, and character arcs just stopped making sense. Big budgets don't guarantee great storytelling, and recent adaptations have proven that. The Wheel of Time leaned heavily on high-budget effects, but it came at the expense of exploring the core themes of the books.
Spectacle may grab attention, but it's the emotional beats and meaningful arcs that keep people coming back. Without those, all the CGI in the world can't save a story.
Fantasy adaptations often have massive budgets and even bigger expectations, so it's no surprise that studios get heavily involved. But sometimes that involvement does more harm than good. To appeal to the broadest audience, studios simplify complex characters or water down story beats. Take Shadow and Bone. While it brought the Six of Crows universe to life with impressive visuals and a talented cast, many fans felt the blending. The two books diluted the complexity of the stories, and some of the grittier elements of the duology were toned down. The adaptation risked losing the essence that made the books so beloved by trying to do too much at once and appeal to everyone.
On top of that, tight release schedules often mean rushed productions, which leads to sloppy storytelling and underdeveloped characters. It's like they're more focused on keeping the content machine rolling than actually producing something meaningful and impactful and with really high quality.
When studios start meddling with the creative team, things can go south fast. Look at The Witcher, when key creatives like Henry Cavill, a massive fan of the books, reportedly clashed with the direction of the series, it signaled trouble. Replacing someone who understands and respects the source material can lead to a disconnect with the audience. Fans of fantasy are deeply invested in these worlds. When their concerns are dismissed, it creates a rift that's hard to repair. The new Star Wars trilogy is a textbook example of how studio interference and misplaced priorities can derail a beloved franchise. Even though it is not an adaptation in the most traditional sense of the word, it sort of adapts the IP of the original trilogy into a modern context. With 3 different directors initially planned and no cohesive vision, the trilogy felt disjointed from the start. The Last Jedi took bold narrative risks that divided fans, while The Rise of Skywalker seemed to double back on those choices in an attempt to appease critics. Instead of telling a consistent story, the films became a tug-of-war between clashing ideas, leaving fans unsatisfied and the story's potential squandered. And then there's the focus on spectacle over substance. While the visuals were undeniably stunning, the storytelling often felt rushed and underdeveloped. Take Palpatine's sudden return in The Rise of Skywalker, a massive plot twist that deserved careful build-up but was instead dropped in without much explanation. It's a clear example of trying to create big, jaw-dropping moments without considering how they fit into the narrative. Fans love Star Wars because of its lore and emotional stakes, but when those elements take a back seat, the magic gets lost. The first key to a successful adaptation is respecting the source material. Peter Jackson treated Tolkien's work like a sacred text, preserving its spirit even while making necessary changes for film. The early seasons of Game of Thrones stayed faithful to Martin's vision and even had his input, adapting the politics and rich character arcs without diluting their complexity. Fans felt like these adaptations were crafted by people who truly understood the source material, and that respect made all the difference. At the core of good adaptations are characters you couldn't help but care about. In Harry Potter, the main trio were relatable characters with real struggles. Harry carried the weight of being the chosen one while longing for a family. Ron grappled with insecurities in the shadow of his siblings, and Hermione struggled to balance her intellect and ambition with her sense of belonging. When you're emotionally invested in the characters, the spells, battles, and magical creatures become the icing on the cake, not the main course. Another reason these adaptations worked so well was the involvement of the original creators and their willingness to collaborate with fans. This happened with the One Piece adaptation, in which Oda followed the production up close and was frequently consulted. Oda was actively involved in major decisions, from casting to ensuring the story stayed true to the spirit of the original manga. Oda's meticulous care, like insisting that certain character traits and moments weren't compromised, reassured fans that this wasn't another lazy cash grab. The first season really showcased the team's heartfelt effort to bring the One Piece world to life. This kind of collaboration lets fans know their beloved worlds are in good hands. So, with all of this in mind, should we say that the fantasy genre is doomed? My optimistic answer is no. While recent adaptations have stumbled, fantasy remains a genre with infinite potential. If studios learn from these missteps and commit to the heart of these stories, we might just see a new golden age of fantasy adaptations. The best way to ensure they learn the lesson is by hitting them where it hurts the most, their pocket. If the fans sabotage the mediocre adaptations, studios will finally learn to put more thought into it.
With all of this said, I don't think Witcher, Rings of Power, and Wheel of Time are horrible adaptations by any means. They are enjoyable, and you can have fun watching them, but ultimately they feel like missed opportunities, because they could have been so much better, and they could have represented the source material in such an impactful way. If the rumors are true, we may be getting adaptations of Warhammer, Broken Earth, Mistborn, First Law, ACOTAR, and Fourth Ring in the near future. Fingers crossed, Hollywood learned something from recent examples, and these stories are better represented. So what do you think? Are these missteps just growing pains, or do they signal a bigger problem with how fantasy adaptations are handled? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. What adaptations have you loved, and which ones totally missed the mark for you? By the way, our next video is the 1000 sub celebration video. I'm going to be answering some of your guys' comments and questions. So if you want me to address anything in the next video, just comment below and I'll be sure to do that. Of course, keep it respectful and polite. I'm sure your parents taught you manners. Thanks for watching, and I see you again in the next one. Come join our Tavern discussion of fantasy storytelling and world building here at Loregeist. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching, and may your tales be ever epic.